Mornings often feel like a race. First watched a colleague who used to rush through every hour, add one 10-minute routine and go from missed deadlines to calm, focused afternoons. It wasn't a new app or a long to-do list. Every morning he wrote 3 sentences about what mattered that day and picked one non-negotiable task, and that tiny choice forced clarity, cut decision noise, and shifted where he spent his energy. He stopped firefighting at 4 p.m. and started protecting 2 hours of deep work. Most small habits get ignored because they look useless at first. But repeated, they stack. 3 sentences turned into steadier weeks, and the steadier weeks became momentum that showed up in less stress, cleaner inboxes, and real progress on a long-term project. One concrete example: a freelancer who wrote a single paragraph daily finished a full client proposal in 2 weeks instead of stalling for months. You probably think discipline means grit and sacrifice. The quiet kind first talking about simply lowers resistance and redirects tiny choices, and later you'll hear the exact short morning script my friend used and the common mistakes that make good habits fizzle out. A small habit, a quiet revolution. The gap between ambition and action is a constant tension for many people. It shows up as a drawer full of half-started projects and mornings where the to-do list feels heavier than the day itself. When the first step feels huge, most plans stall quickly. So a habit that takes almost no effort can be the only thing that keeps the ship moving. A tiny action changes the math of showing up because it lowers the barrier to begin. Do 1 sentence of writing instead of an essay. Do a single stretch instead of a full workout. Because the cost is small, resistance often loses before it even gets started. Over time, those tiny starts add up into a pattern that feels natural rather than heroic. Context does most of the work for small habits. Leave your running shoes by the door and mornings begin talking in a different voice. Put a notebook by your coffee and a paragraph becomes plausible. Because the cue is obvious and the step is minimal, the brain links the situation to the action and the action becomes easier to repeat. That link is why tiny changes stick when grand pledges usually don't. Small habits change identity subtly and steadily. Writing a sentence each day makes you someone who writes. Watering one plant means you become a person who tends. Since identity guides behavior, those tiny acts reshape what feels normal, which in turn changes future choices. The shift is quiet, but the cumulative effect becomes visible in daily choices and, eventually, in results that surprise you because they happened without drama. The mechanics of incremental change. Big goals often stall because people expect dramatic moves instead of steady repetition. When daily actions are tiny but consistent, they add up in very practical ways. Neural pathways strengthen, skills that felt awkward begin to feel normal, and projects that seemed endless suddenly reach a tipping point as small units of work stack into meaningful progress. This is why a neighbor who plays scales for a few minutes most mornings ends up learning pieces that once felt out of reach. Because each short session makes the next one slightly easier, practice accumulates without a visible headline. Decision fatigue and everyday friction quietly sabotage progress. Little obstacles, a charger tucked away, a cluttered workspace, an inconvenient routine, multiply and turn possible habits into rare events. And when those events are rare, the compound effect never starts. People who reduce those barriers report more consistent routines because the cue and the action line up with less effort. The mechanics are simple. Lower the activation energy and the behavior happens more often, which is how small wins accumulate. Progress is often invisible at first, and that invisibility breeds doubt. Learning a language in short daily bursts doesn't feel like a flood of new words, but each encounter strengthens recall and gradually expands usable vocabulary until conversations stop feeling like a struggle, and only then does the change look dramatic. Writers who mark off days on a calendar describe a chain reaction where missing a day feels stranger than keeping the streak, and the manuscript that once seemed impossible becomes a stack of finished chapters. Making measurement and feedback visible translates invisible gains into motivation, and motivation drives repetition. Even steady systems hit plateaus, and those plateaus create pressure to quit or to overhaul everything. Small, deliberate adjustments, changing tempo in practice, swapping elements of a routine, or nudging the challenge a bit, keep adaptation happening without collapsing the habit that created the gains. Athletes who make modest increases in load or practice complexity over time avoid sudden breakdowns and keep building capacity steadily. Incremental change works because it pairs consistent, low-friction actions with timely feedback and occasional tweaks. Together those parts form a machine that turns tiny inputs into large outcomes. How daily choices stack over time. Small actions performed every day add up in ways people usually notice only after a long stretch of time. A deposit that sits and grows in an account benefits from compound interest, and the same math applies to habits. Tiny investments of time or money build into a different reality. For example, someone who consistently chooses the stairs instead of the elevator strengthens legs and cardiovascular fitness across weeks and months, without ever needing an intense single session. Because each choice slightly shifts capacity or balance, the next choice becomes easier or harder depending on what came before. Most of the shift comes from how daily choices reshape the environment around you. Put a book on your pillow and your bedtime routine starts to include reading. Keep fast food within arm's reach and convenience will erode the will to cook. These are simple, concrete adjustments that change what feels normal. Over time, that altered normal determines the easy options you take. When the environment nudges you, those tiny nudges add up into predictable patterns of behavior. Momentum matters as much as intention. Crossing small things off a list generates a sense of progress that makes the next item seem less daunting. The reverse is true too. Letting little tasks pile up creates a growing burden that saps focus and energy. For instance, clearing email in short, regular bursts prevents a backlog that later requires hours to sort through, and skipping that clearing habit turns those messages into a recurring source of distraction. Because effort compounds, momentum either lightens or multiplies future work. Choices also interact, not just stack. A decision to prep lunch the night before reduces the chance of buying an expensive meal, which in turn lowers spending and frees mental energy for planning other parts of the day. Small savings automatically transferred each pay period grow into a cushion that changes how you react to unexpected expenses. Likewise, a few minutes of stretching each morning reduces soreness, which makes it easier to be active later, and that activity feeds back into better sleep. When tiny habits connect, their effects multiply in real life. Handling slips, recovery without drama. When a plan unravels midweek, it can feel like the whole thing is collapsing. It happens fast. One missed workout or one late night of work eaten up by scrolling doesn't automatically erase progress. Treating a slip as a character judgment, like "first I'm lazy," tends to push behavior further away, because shame narrows focus and increases avoidance. That first impulse is to overreact. Most people know that reaction, replaying the mistake, making it bigger in the mind, and then deciding the day or week is ruined. For example, someone who wakes late and misses a morning class often skips any movement all day because the alternative feels inadequate, and that decision sets a pattern for the following days. A calmer first step is simple notice-taking without drama. Say to yourself, "First missed that session," rather than "first failed completely." That shift in wording matters. When a person frames a slip as a fact rather than a moral verdict, the next action is more likely to be small and constructive. Consider a concrete case. After overeating at a dinner, having a plan to drink a tall glass of water and aim for a balanced breakfast the next morning reduces the common cycle of punishment and rebound eating. Small, immediate actions rebuild momentum better than grand gestures. After missing a deadline, sending a brief update to stakeholders and breaking the remaining work into 2 or 3 focused chunks creates visible progress and lowers anxiety. For another concrete example, someone who misses the gym might do a 10-minute bodyweight routine at home that evening. This tiny commitment preserves identity and continuity, so returning to the gym the next session feels natural. When slips are anticipated, recovery becomes less stressful and more automatic. People who pre-write a recovery script, such as "if first skip a workout, first we'll do 10 minutes of movement before bed," remove the decision friction that turns a single lapse into an extended slide. Simple environment tweaks achieve similar effects. Keeping running shoes by the door or a filled water bottle on the kitchen counter nudges behavior back toward the intention without heavy deliberation. Language and reporting shape whether a slip escalates. Using neutral, specific phrases like "first skip today's run" or "first missed the deadline by 1 day" focuses on the event and its remedy, and avoids moralizing, which fuels avoidance. Telling a friend a short factual update, "first missed today's session, doing a 15-minute stretch now," often produces accountability and keeps plans intact, because a concise, factual account invites support instead of self-reproach. Building a routine that actually fits you. Human energy isn't constant. Most people cycle through predictable peaks and troughs, so a one-size-fits-all schedule usually collapses. When a night person forces themselves into an early morning deep work block, the result is low-quality output and frustration. That mismatch explains why many carefully crafted plans die within a week. Biology and context push back. A better fit starts with noticing when focus naturally arrives, and then placing the hardest or most creative work in those windows instead of where some productivity guru said it should be. Daily life throws curveballs: childcare, sudden meetings, delayed trains. So routines that assume perfect conditions fail more often than they succeed. Because of these variations, small, movable anchors hold routines together. A 5-minute review after morning coffee, a 2-item priority list before lunch. Anchors create stability without rigidity. For example, a freelance designer first no-schedules client calls only in the afternoon and keeps mornings for sketching. That constraint makes creative mornings reliably productive even when the rest of the day shifts. Motivation rises and falls, and habits win by changing context more than willpower. Tying a new behavior to an existing habit and simplifying the first step reduces resistance. Laying out running shoes the night before makes starting a run easier, and having a single window open for focused work cuts the cognitive cost of getting going. Over time, those tiny nudges add up because repeated context cues trigger the behavior automatically, which means less reliance on motivation and more on built-in practice. Routines that fit evolve, not snap into place overnight. Short, regular check-ins, 2 sentences of reflection at night or a quick Sunday tweak, reveal what's actually working and what's just aspirational. Swapping a late-night email session for a short midday buffer can improve sleep and reduce stress, and noticing the effect guides the next change. Pay attention to concrete signals like consistent energy for an activity, fewer friction points, or smoother transitions. They show when a routine is truly adapted to your life rather than imposed on it. Ever notice how tiny choices end up shaping whole mornings and then whole months? A simple daily discipline, 5 focused minutes of writing, 1 push-up, a short walk, builds momentum, reduces decision fatigue, and over weeks compounds into noticeably different results. You might doubt that a small habit can change anything. Look at someone who wrote 300 words each morning and finished a novel in a year, or a friend who saved a coffee's cost every workday and suddenly had an emergency fund. The cause, one small repeated action, clearly led to the effect, a finished project, real financial cushion. It doesn't require perfection. If this resonated, consider picking one tiny habit this week: 5 minutes of reading, a short paragraph toward a goal, 1 page of planning, and simply observe what consistent repetition does. Sharing what you notice helps keep the momentum real. Wondering what comes next? Expect more real experiments and practical examples. 30-day mini challenges, interviews with people who quietly shifted careers, and simple templates for fitting these tiny disciplines into busy days. Small things add up. Notice the choice you make tomorrow morning, see where it nudges the rest of your day, and if you want to keep exploring, there will be more episodes that trace how those quiet routines slowly change everything.